Hey, everybody, and welcome to the DLF Trade Show on the DLF YouTube channel. Whee! Russ Fisher, Dynasty House, Addison Hayes, Adam Hayes _. We are here to talk about fantasy football, the players, the values, dynastyleaguefootball.com, the trade finder, the trade analyzer. Probably going to talk some ADP because I plays into what we're going to be talking about. So if you don't subscribe to dynastyleaguefootball.com and you like this stuff we're talking about, go do that because it's the right thing to do and because you'll be better for it.
Yes.
And we want you to be better. Be better. Not just fantasy football, in life. So last week, we talked about some players that are worth going to see if you can acquire in your leagues. So now, rightfully so, move on to what's the next step. Players that you see what you can get to go and send them out because their value might be hitting a level that might be unrealistic or higher than we think it should be, I guess is a better way to put it. So the first player I want to talk about is Anthony Richardson. And I understand the upside of Anthony Richardson, the athleticism he shows with the offense that he should be playing in. I'm trying to find right ways to word this. You know, the Colts did the smart thing. They went out and they got the Eagles offensive coordinator, which of course maybe had an iffy end of the season, but still made it to the Super Bowl. So they went and got an offensive coordinator that is known for working well with mobile quarterbacks. They just got the mobile quarterback of the draft. And they have some good wide receivers. I love me some Michael Pittman. And then we have these upside players. I mean, Josh Downs, I think, is a very good wide receiver. I still really like Alec Pierce. Jelani Woods with that athleticism at tight end. And not to mention Jonathan Taylor behind them. Like, it's a good offense. And their line is usually pretty good to good, if not a little better. The past few years, it's been like here-ish when it used to be here-ish.
Yeah, last year's garbage.
Last year, okay. Again, I'm trying to be a little nice. So hopefully that gets worked on a little bit, and so everything is set up for Anthony Richardson to do well. My little bit of issue is his ADP is 14. Like that's high. Like he's in a
QB what?
Yeah, I was just pulling it up right now. 9. Like we're in. It's a little different because he's not coming off of injury, but this is Trey Lance territory last year. Like this, Trey Lance was up at QB 9-ish, 7 to 9 before the season started. And even once the season started, before he got hurt, it started to drop a little bit, and it should. Like, I get it. There's not much exciting about Dak Prescott. You have to wait a little bit for Kyler to come back. But to have Anthony Richardson all of a sudden at QB1 in this draft class, and did I say 1 or A? I can't remember. So I'm just going to go with 2. And 2 above those players that we have seen multiple years of scoring well. And there's a lot of risk with Richardson, especially with all of the accuracy or lack thereof issues coming in. So, nice. So, like, I like the idea of Anthony Richardson. I think he's a lot of fun. I loved drafting him at 102 in rookie drafts. But I think in a startup, I put him behind Young and Stroud. Like, to me, startups are very different than rookie drafts. If I'm spending a second round startup pick, I want to feel a little safer. Like, the floor of Anthony Richardson is practically 0. And of course, it might take a year or 2 to hit that. Like, if he just flames out, it's still... If he just, it's scary to me. It is way too, and I know more than not, I'm usually pretty risk averse, but like, I'm like running away from this risk in a startup. Like it's just far too much for me.
Well, I think the interesting thing is, a lot of people might say, well, Anthony Richardson has the ceiling to be 2019 Lamar Jackson, to be what Josh Allen has been, and to be what Jalen Hurts was last year. And while that's all true, the problem is that as we continue to push up his ADP higher and higher, is that really mitigates a lot of the ceiling impact that, like, you get to the point where he has to produce like that in order to pay off for the ADP. He's not there yet, But QB9, I mean, just even a couple months ago, even when he was drafted, he was still, I think, like QB13, QB12, QB13. He's now QB9. And he's getting talked about as, do you want him or Justin Fields? Do you want him or Trevor Lawrence? And it seems like it's just a foregone conclusion that everybody wants him over Dak, Deshaun Watson, Tua, Kyler, all the other rookies, obviously, of course, because he's being drafted as a QB1. And it gets to that point where at what point does it just not make sense to take Anthony Richardson anymore and take something that we've from a player that we've already seen the known production, less risk, maybe not the same ceiling or as high of a ceiling, but at least your range of outcomes is a lot tighter with still a similarly ished kind of ceiling to Anthony Richardson.
The first one we have is 12-team Superflex. Ooh, this is fun. The trade: Anthony Richardson, Dalton Kincaid, Devin Achane, and Josh Downs, the rookie special, for CeeDee Lamb and Dak Prescott. I love that we're taking another quarterback we've talked about already, and then somehow it is rookies for a beautiful stack right here. So, I mean, I'm not going to read all of this, but the Anthony Richardson is worth 666. And his side totals in 970. So he's 2/3 of that by himself. Everyone else, Dalton Kincaid is the next highest player at 146. So that should show you how much of that side's value is just Richardson. And CeeDee Lamb and Dak Prescott come together for 1417. So this is the two players overpaying to get to the 4 players. Now, I guess my question is going to be, is it? No, it's not a question. I don't care if you're rebuilding. You don't give up this much value. You don't. I get it. Maybe Dak being in at 690 is a little high because, I mean, his ADP is around 15, but he's at that tier break of quarterbacks for me where it's just like, I like having him. I don't feel great where I had to draft him because he has a very boring ceiling and a very boring floor. Like, there's not much excitement in Dak Prescott. There's not much excitement in Tua Tagovailoa, but they're good for your team. So the ceiling is absolutely there on the other side with Richardson, Kincaid, and Achane, and you get that stack of downs if he becomes a good part of that offense. I don't see a world where I give up CeeDee Lamb and Dak Prescott for this group now. But like you said, we hit week 3. Anthony Richardson looks like he's doing well. Anthony Richardson puts up low 20s points per game. Even if he doesn't explode, he shows that he does have that safety, with the legs giving him that nice floor, and maybe has one game of the upper 20s. And if Miami doesn't sign Dalvin Cook, Achane could be a large part of that. Like, this can work out to be a fair trade, which is not how you want that to be worded. Like, this could work out where the package is really, really nice for you, but it'll take very specific things to happen. So to me, this is like so easily right now the Cowboys players.
Yeah, but I mean, this is rookie hype, and I mean, before you even put names to the rookies, like, you could have just said, "This is 3 firsts and a early to mid second for Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb." Like, you just got the 102, a mid first, a late first, early mid second for Dak and CeeDee Lamb, and I think when you word it that way, I think most people would take Dak and CeeDee. It's only then whenever you apply the names to it that I feel like people start going a little bit crazier because they're like, oh, well, that early first is actually Anthony Richardson. It's not Bryce Young. It's Anthony Richardson. It's not CJ Stroud. It's Anthony Richardson. That mid first is now Dalton Kincaid. It's not Zach Charbonnet. It's Dalton Kincaid, who could be a really good tight end. Devon Achane, obviously, is the landing spot GOAT of the rookie running back group this year.
Yep.
Josh Downs is a really solid flyer as well too. And so it's just, it's all rookie hype right now. Whereas you could just have Dak Prescott, who's basically a perennial top 10 quarterback, and CeeDee Lamb, who has now established himself as a top 5 fantasy wide receiver. So,
okay. So this, I just saw the next trade. Getting a little steamy here. Anthony Richardson for Bryce Young and Christian McCaffrey. Now, I want to take a step back and put this in terms that Addison just did a minute ago. This is the 102 for the 103 and Christian McCaffrey. Wow.
Can you
Okay, so
imagine negotiating that trade? Being like, yeah, the guy who has 103 comes to you and be like, hey, I really want to get up to 102. Like, I want Anthony Richardson. I'm just going to be flat out and tell you that right now. These are the players that I'm thinking that I could add to the 103 to get there. But what are you thinking? And then they go, well, I would need Christian McCaffrey on top of the 103.
and then they don't even say, why don't you throw in a second? They're just like, okay.
Yeah.
Because I'll read you the values and you'll see why. Because Anthony Richardson 666, Bryce Young 645, Christian McCaffrey 618, like for a total of 1263. It's just
double
for reals. And I get it. Young and Stroud aren't exciting. They're not, but they're very good quarterbacks. Like we were just talking about Dak Prescott has. Okay, hold on. Let me put this in ways that doesn't sound bad. Because Dak Prescott, like I said before, has a very floor and ceiling. Very good, though. And you said perennial top 10 quarterback. Of course, you're dreaming a little high to say that Bryce Young is going to be Dak Prescott, but feels realistic to be Tua, that 10 to 12 to 13 instead of 6 to 10.
Mm-hmm.
And I get it. Anthony Richardson's ceiling, I mean, it feels weird to say 101 because of what we have there, but if he does it 2 years in a row, Josh Allen is 29, Mahomes is 31, maybe he gets pushed up that high to the, we'll just say top tier instead of saying the 101. You know, Richardson in a couple of years has the ability to push himself there. That's a hell of a risk. Giving up Christian McCaffrey as a down payment on that risk. Like
I was gonna say, there's definitely a world where like this trade doesn't look good. Like if McCaffrey gets hurt again and Bryce Young just doesn't develop, you know, and he's like Mac Jones, like the next
but that's
like that. It's just
that's this trade this is a bad trade with an asterisk. That's what that means. That's not it's a bad trade. It's a good trade, I should say. It's a good trade with an asterisk. It's like this was good, but then this happened.
But
like,
then that happened
outside of the world of control of anything realistic. Like you can't predict injury, and it's silly to think you can, especially. All right, I'll be the one to say like I was ready for McCaffrey to get hurt again this year, but he didn't. So why think he will next year? Like the dude isn't built like a human being. It seems like he may literally just be the Incredible Hulk. But I know he's going to put up a lot of points, assuming he steps on the field. And I can't imagine a world of giving up Young and McCaffrey to go get Richardson. Oh, okay. Anthony Richardson and Deshaun Watson for Patrick Mahomes. Anthony Richardson still at 666. Deshaun Watson 596 for a total of 1261. Patrick Mahomes 973. Everything I just said being said, oh man, just give me Mahomes. Like, I get it. You're getting, personal feelings aside of Deshaun Watson, you are getting probably the floor of QB12 area, assuming he comes in, that rust is shaken off, you know, that they have some decent pass catchers on that team. Their defense is so they'll be passing a decent amount. Like, I have faith that Deshaun Watson can come back and be a decent percentage of what Deshaun Watson used to be.
Yeah.
Not saying he'll come back and be QB1, because the idea of what a QB1 has changed in that long since he's played last. It's so weird to think of how long it's been and how much has changed since then. But like, yeah, like getting a somewhat safe quarterback in Deshaun Watson that has that upside, and then just pure upside in Anthony Richardson, I get it. But if you're telling me I could just get Patrick Mahomes, I'd just take Patrick Mahomes. I don't care if that's wrong. I just want Patrick Mahomes.
I would take Richardson and Watson.
I get it.
I just feel like the upside is so tantalizing.
Yes.
Can you imagine? Literally, it wouldn't even be a year from now. It'd be like 5 months from now. We could be talking about turning Patrick Mahomes into 2 top 5 quarterbacks.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And again, this is all assuming you live in my world where you have a couple of shares of Anthony Richardson, probably don't have a couple of shares of Mahomes, because if you do, good for you. Man, like really, like
yeah.
But I have my feelings on Watson, and I have enough Richardson. I don't have enough Mahomes in my world, in my life, really. The next player we have on the list, I am very upset about because about a month ago, I wrote a Trading Post article about it might be time to go get Jonathan Taylor. And then Jonathan Taylor showed up as running back 2 in both 1 QB and Superflex June ADP. And it's just like, no, why? This ruins that. It's gone now. Like, I loved the idea of Jonathan Taylor at that RB 4 or 5 area, getting drafted in like the 4th round, not 4th, like end of the 2nd, beginning of 3rd. Those are the words that were supposed to be coming out of my mouth. Again, super flex, because that's the world I live in. So let's pull down. Let's pull up the super flex. Let's pull up running backs. He is running back 2, ADP of about 21. I guess that's technically not super bad, but it's still
still late second.
It's. I would
I
love
feel like you don't, whoever that RB2 name is, I don't think you just won't like it because they all seem very similar.
if it was Brees Hall, I'd be much happier. I really like. I mean, I get it.
That's who I have.
It's a 2 years and change savings on Jonathan Taylor, but what, 3 years in the league difference? 2021, 22. Well, I guess 2 full seasons. Well, Brees didn't really play a full season. Besides the point, So I mean, push Brees Hall up there. McCaffrey could probably be there. So to me, Jonathan Taylor, again, I loved having him at RB4. RB4 is right now Brees Hall coming in at around pick 27. Like, if you told me Jonathan Taylor I could get at pick 27, I would like it so much more.
And I just like whoever's the last of that whole group.
That could also be a very fair. Because I do think that's a bit of a tier right there with Bijan, JT, McCaffrey, and Hall. And then next you have Barkley, Gibbs, Eckler, Josh Jacobs. And yeah, that does feel like a bit of a tier. And honestly, Barkley would be a tier up if there wasn't this whole holdout rumor stuff that is giving me anxiety to no ends. Like, please don't. And Josh Jacobs says he's willing to miss weeks. And it's just like, why? Like, okay, so let's look at the trades to see what the value looks like in some offers. In a 12-team, 1 quarterback, we have Jonathan Taylor for the 102 and Amari Cooper. So Jahmyr Gibbs, can we just say it?
Yes.
Jonathan Taylor for Jahmyr Gibbs and Amari Cooper. Jonathan Taylor in at 862, the 102 at 619, and Amari Cooper at 239 is a nice, for a total of 858. So this is on paper relatively fair. I would do this, I think, if I had a team that I wanted to compete, I had the 102, assuming I didn't earn that. I would throw in a wide receiver 2-ish player to go get Jonathan Taylor. Not that I dislike Jahmyr Gibbs, but
he was on your list as well. When we were doing this show, he was on your sell list.
Jahmyr Gibbs just keeps going up, and I'm not here for it yet. Like, I'm not completely sold on the fact that he's not what we've seen DeAndre Swift be for the past couple of years, hopefully minus the injuries, because I never wish that on anyone. But give me Jonathan Taylor, who we've seen do the workhorse role, and even at the end of last year started to look good in a bad offense. So give me Jonathan Taylor with Anthony Richardson in front of him, and I'm in. So honestly, the 102 and Amari Cooper isn't bad, because especially if my teams are built the way I build them, Amari Cooper's my wide receiver 4 or 5. So I don't feel terrible about losing him. So I think I'm good with this. I think I would pay this for Jonathan Taylor. I don't think I like sending Jonathan Taylor for this. And that is absolutely probably 100% my Jahmyr Gibbs bias.
Oh, so I love Jahmyr Gibbs. So I would 100% be willing to send Jonathan Taylor away for Gibbs and Cooper.
So what you're telling me is you didn't actually really like DeAndre Swift. You just liked the receiving back plus
I love DeAndre Swift
in Detroit.
I love Swift as a player, and then that role in Detroit is fantastic, and it did work out when Swift was healthy. It's just he wasn't healthy all the time, and then so they had to move on. So now that rolls with Jahmyr Gibbs. And I honestly, I wouldn't be shocked if Jahmyr Gibbs and Jonathan Taylor by the end of the season are within a 1 to 2 fantasy points of each other, with Taylor ahead of Gibbs. I don't think Gibbs is going to be ahead of JT yet, but
okay.
I think they're going to be relatively close production-wise in terms of points per game. And in Dynasty, if that's the case, You're getting Jahmyr Gibbs. You're buying 3 years back of age at the running back position at the beginning of his contract, not the end of his contract.
Yep.
And you're getting a free mid-tier wide receiver too, who has wide receiver one upside. I mean, Cooper was a wide receiver one last year in total points, not in points per game, but in total points. And
availability is one of the best abilities. Just saying.
Yeah, and if Deshaun Watson does come back and is closer to Deshaun Watson of Houston, and Amari is the wide receiver one for that, that could be how he gets to being a wide receiver one in points per game.
Yep.
So I am. This is trading down at the running back position to me perfectly.
If you slid the name Breece Hall in there, I'm all in. If it's Saquon, I would do it.
I don't think it gets done when it gets to that point. I think Gibbs is the only one really that gets up there because there's still enough of that unknown with Gibbs of where it is like how people like you are like, well, this is a rookie. Is this just a shiny new toy thing? Yeah. Whereas with Saquon, we've seen it. Breece Hall, we've seen it. Otherwise, you got to drop down a little bit lower and you're dropping into like the ETN tier, the Jacobs tier, Najee. And that's too low to just get Amari back. So, yeah.
I don't like that you're making me think a lot this show. I don't appreciate it.
That's what I'm here.
Let's move on. Oh, come on. The next one, Jonathan Taylor and Joe Mixon for A.J. Brown, Calvin Ridley, and Samaje Perine. So you had to throw Calvin Ridley in one of these. Okay, 1-for-1, Jonathan Taylor or A.J. Brown?
A.J. Brown, team wide receiver.
Yeah, I'm going to put my wide receiver bias out there pretty hard and just say A.J. Brown. Joe Mixon or, oh man, I love this. Joe Mixon, 269.9, Calvin Ridley, 297.3. Yeah, Calvin. Yeah, getting up there. I love it. Oh, by the way, Jonathan Taylor, Joe Mixon, caution, Team B is giving up the highest value asset and the most pieces in the deal. Then again, the extra piece is Samaje Perine. I get it that you have the ability to walk away from this with two very good running backs. Right now, Joe Mixon is still the starter in Cincinnati, and they got rid of the dude that was stealing touches from him. And there's a lot of behind Joe Mixon right now.
So Chase Brown. You stop it.
So, there's a chance that if nothing changes, Joe Mixon's the dude again. And again, he didn't look great last year. And as we all want to be armchair coaches and strength and conditioning coordinators and all that stuff, we don't know why. Maybe he's old. Maybe he was hurt. We have no idea whatsoever. So, not to say Joe Mixon's going to come back and be that 50 points per game, that one game, the entire season or anything. But if he comes back as a pretty solid running back too, high end, maybe hits a couple of low end RB1 weeks, this could be a really good trade for you. I don't think I care. That's my problem. Joe Mixon has not gone up in value in over a year, and he's just going to keep going lower.
I was going to say, I don't think he ever will. He's in the Fournette category of we just hated Fournette, even though he was producing. It didn't matter. We're just going to hate Fournette forever.
The second he changed teams, he was done, and especially because of why he changed teams, and all of a sudden he got just the label of being a troublemaker, and it's just no, that was just a really crappy front office, and I would have been annoyed in that existence as well. Of course, it would have been nice to hang around for the Trevor Lawrence year, but that is what that is.
He got a Super Bowl, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah, right. Winning's worth it. It's fine. So, you can walk away with two very, very, very good running backs here. My issue is you're getting a top 4 dynasty wide receiver, and that's, to me, he's 3, but it depends what you do with Lamb or Waddle. There's a couple of other people that you could throw up there. So I'll say top 4, top 5. Calvin Ridley, I think he is going to be insanely solid. He's on a up-and-coming offense. Trevor Lawrence, he will be the wide receiver one there. We all know I loved me some Christian Kirk heading into the year, but this is Calvin Ridley. It's Calvin Ridley. So he's the pass catcher one on that team, on a team that's just going to keep getting better. And then Samaje Perine is going to be the starter for the Broncos as of now.
Usable.
Yeah, Javonte, as of now, for what we know on July 5th, because it's not June anymore, Javonte Williams isn't ready to play yet. So it's going to be Samaje Perine because they don't really have anyone else to play. In which case, even when Javonte comes back, you know they're not going to workhorse him in general, but especially not this year. So Samaje is going to have use. So, like, to me, I think I would rather just because especially if you think about it, crossing out JT and AJ Brown, because to me they are pretty much right next to each other. ADP of one quarterback, ADP of 5 for AJ Brown and 5.33 for Jonathan Taylor. Same, close enough. And then Joe Mixon for Calvin Ridley and Samaje Perine. I take Calvin and Samaje all day. So I'm going to take the wide receivers.
Yeah, I'm team wide receiver on this one too. Does this change at all? Because I feel like this is a really weird trade of like 2 running backs for 2 wide receivers, basically. If we were to swap Ridley and Mixon, so it was JT and Ridley for Brown and Mixon, does that change your answer at all? Because it's a more like, do you prefer the higher end wide receiver with the potential at the running back, or the higher end running back with the potential at wide receiver?
So here's where personal bias is going to come in. I'm in on JT, and I understand JT equals Brown, and Brown I also understand is awesome. I would take JT and Ridley over AJ Brown and Mixon, and even if you want to put Perine in there, I think I take that other side, because if we can talk in a realistic that maybe last year could be close to a ceiling for AJ Brown, which would be somewhat realistic, seeing as how he finished at like wide receiver 3-ish,
Yeah.
So, Jonathan Taylor can push his way back up to where he was. He finishes as a top 5 running back. Calvin Ridley finishes as wide receiver 14, 16. I think that already outweighs AJ Brown, Mixon, and whatever usable weeks Perine gives you.
Yeah. I definitely think that makes it more interesting, is if you do the running back wide receiver swap.
That definitely does make it a much more interesting trade. Yes. Yeah, I agree with you completely.
But the way it's laid out, I'm taking AJ Brown.
Yeah. Okay, so the next one is the player. Okay, so apparently we do 2 for 1 whenever I give you a long list. You're just like, all right, 2 of Russ's, and I'm going to put one of mine in. So why don't you introduce the next guy?
Oh, yeah. So Terry McLaurin. And the reason why is essentially like when you look at ADP's wide receiver 25, so it's not that high. And McLaurin, basically since he came into the league, has been a perennial top 25 guy. I mean, he hasn't really ever had like that breakout season to where he's like been a top 15 guy, but he is just super consistent. 16 to 24 essentially is where he lives. He had that one year, I think it was 2020, where he was averaging like 15 points per game, but he didn't play all 16 games at that point. But in the games he did play, he did well. And it's been, quarterback issues in Washington, the whole 9 yards basically for McLaurin. My issue with him is not necessarily an issue. It's just that I think that he is in a place right now, ADP wise, where he's a player that you could very easily add something relatively small to and go up and get something better, maybe with a better or higher ceiling, like an aging veteran, like a Devontae Adams, or maybe a Cooper Kupp, if you're able to do that, or just get a similarly producing wide receiver, but like 3-4 years younger. Because I don't know if you know this, Terry McLaurin is going to turn 28 years old in a couple months.
Yeah.
So, like, even though he's still on his rookie contract, he is 28 or about to turn 28. So he's getting up there. Like, he's also going to be an aging producing veteran, like how Tyler Lockett was like 2 years ago. Anyway, so you could either do that with McLaurin, add something small to him and go up, or I also think that he is at a point where you're able to move back and get somebody who maybe has a little bit more risk, but could also produce very similarly, and you're able to get something extra on top. Do the the good old fashioned trade down. One perfect example of that, at least if you look at ADP, is you can go from McLaurin down to Amari, which is like a 10 spot difference at wide receiver.
Oh,
and maybe you just get a free 2nd round pick. Maybe Amari outscores McLaurin. That's possible. You can go down to Brandon Ayuk. You can go down to Christian Kirk, Deontay Johnson. Take the shot on, Quentin Johnston or Zay Flowers. Go down to Keenan Allen if you just want production and you get something on top. There's a lot of different ways that you can trade down from McLaurin or trade up, that he just represents kind of this player that's in the middle of the tier that I feel like everybody just likes and has very good name value, because Terry McLaurin is a very good wide receiver and nobody
Yes.
really has issues with him. He's just, it's just a weird value, and he's not necessarily the highest ceilinged player. He's just who he is, I think, at this point.
One of the fun differences in ADP is shown right here. One quarterback mock drafts, he has an ADP of wide receiver 25. In Superflex, wide receiver 32. Like you're talking like trade down to 10 spots to Amari Cooper. I'm looking like, what are you talking about? McLaurin's 32, Amari's 33. Oh, he's probably looking at one quarterback. That's a big difference.
Well, that's another thing too, is that represent, like, a lot of these guys in here like are very much the same in terms of like how they're being valued. You know, Burks, Addison, DJ Moore, McLaurin, Hollywood, Ridley, Judy, Ayuk, Dotson, Kirk, Amari. Like, that's like, I just named like 10 guys that if you asked 100 different people who play Dynasty, you're going to get 100 different rankings on how those 10 guys are actually being ranked, you know, down like to the actual spot. But if you are somebody who has Terry McLaurin closer to wide receiver 35, and there's somebody in your league who has McLaurin closer to wide receiver 25, you know, that represents a value gap that I think that you can take advantage of, and maybe you could sidestep within the tier and get an extra second on top, or an extra James Conner, an extra Antonio Gibson, or even an extra David Montgomery or whatever, you know, or add something to McLaurin and get one of their, you know, Devontae Adamses, or, you know, DK Metcalfs, or Devonta Smiths, or, you know, some, or this trade that we're going to do.
You're going way too high up when you're listening to this. 12-team 2-quarterback. Interesting. Terry McLaurin and Desmond Ridder for Jackson Smith and Jigba. McLaurin coming in at 211. Desmond Ridder still only coming in at 120. That's a little feeling a little low for a 2-quarterback league. But still, total of 332. JSN coming in at 441. I think regardless of Ridder being undervalued here, I still think it's a good trade because of what I believe in JSN and what he see. Like, he has an ADP of 43, which feels pretty good, 4th-ish round for a guy that might take a year, but is insanely talented. I would be scared to do it, but if this is one of those leagues that have a lot of movement in it, and when it's 2 QB, which means you have to start a quarterback or you're getting zeros, and oh wow, so if everyone had 3, that'd be 36. Oh man, in a 12-team 2 QB, assuming this is really 2 quarterbacks and not super flex.
Yeah, it was 2.
The more I say it out loud, it's really hard for me to, if Ridder is my QB 4, I do this, because I think that is enough of a upgraded wide receiver to be worth it. Otherwise, I'm pretty scared to do it, but I still think the value is there.
I'd do it. I think basically the way I see it, no matter what, I'm doing it. If Ridder is your QB 3 or 4, that means that you have the ability to move him and you're not interrupting your core starting quarterbacks. Obviously, stuff could happen, and if they have a bye week or a quarterback gets hurt in a 2-quarterback league, you're going to be screwed because you can't start another player in Superflex.
Yep.
If Ridder's your QB 2,
oh, you're in trouble anyway.
I think that's what I mean. Like, I think you're kind of in trouble, and I think you should just take JSN anyway, because
that's probably
the start of your rebuild.
Very fair.
If Ridder's your QB 1, you should definitely take JSN.
To make sure you have your own 24 first, and then you'll go and grab Caleb and you'll be fine.
Exactly. So yeah, to me, this is just, in really any situation, even though it's 2 quarterback, I'm willing to make this deal. And this is an example of what I was talking about, where you could just add something relatively small and just go up and get a better wide receiver, a higher ceilinged wide receiver, somebody who has the ability to finish as a wide receiver 1. That I think that time is past for Terry McLaurin.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
JSN.
You're right. Yes. JSN's the answer. All right, last trade, 12-team Superflex. Ooh, biggin. All right, here we go. Terry McLaurin, Calvin Ridley, Sam Howell, and Damian Harris for Najee Harris and Christian Kirk. Whew. All right, McLaurin, Ridley, Howell, and Harris. That side coming in at 529. Najee Harris and Christian Kirk coming in at 522. So analyzer wise, we're talking an even trade. You're not really paying up to consolidate, but Christian Kirk, I guess technically you are still consolidating a bit because, wow, Howell is a starting quarterback, but still only valued at 88.5. That's a little rough.
Yeah.
Like, I would take Howell over Kirk just because he's a quarterback. Sam Howell over Christian Kirk?
No, I wouldn't do that.
He's in Superflex League. Christian Kirk is going to be at best wide receiver 3 or 4 on your team, especially when you're already getting the Jaguars wide receiver 1 on the same side as Howell.
I think Christian Kirk's going to be really good this year still. So
yeah, no, he will. I still like him, but I have to dislike him a little more because I have to like Calvin Ridley too much.
Yeah, I get that.
That's on me. That's on me. Okay, so in this deal, I get it. I think Najee is the most valuable asset in this deal. So I agree with the analyzer on that. That being said, walking away with a starting quarterback who will hopefully be my QB3 on my team, but also getting McLaurin and Ridley, who you will probably put in there as starters every single week, assuming you're starting 10-ish players. And I mean, I'm not ready to say that Damian Harris is nothing. Like, James Cook was okay, but Damian Harris is good. Still, the running back 1 in Buffalo is still Josh Allen, but that's besides the point. But like, I don't think Damian Harris will be bench fodder. I think he'll find his way into your lineup once or twice.
Mm-hmm.
You will start Najee and Christian Kirk every single week. I am hoping that Calvin Ridley comes in and solidifies himself with most targets and most fantasy points every single week. That would be wonderful. It's not going to happen. There's going to be some weeks where Christian Kirk does push himself up there. So I get it. Like, this I think is a good trade. And if I have a very good team and I have the depth of McLaurin, Ridley, Howell, and Harris that doesn't hurt my starting lineup whatsoever to send them away, I would consider this. But I think the package is still my way to go in this one.
I'm taking Najee and Christian Kirk in this one. I don't really see a massive difference between McLaurin and Kirk. And so I just see Najee as the for sure best piece in this whole entire deal. And I'll just go get him as an RB1. I think honestly, like, Ridley and Christian Kirk, I think, are like the fantasy wide receiver 2 version of AJ Brown and Devonta Smith. That's basically how I'm going to be projecting this moving forward. Pair whichever of those two you want to AJ Brown or Smith. Ridley is AJ Brown in my head and Smith is Kirk. Just the fantasy wide. Instead of both of them being, competing for wide receiver 1 numbers where they're like around the 20-point mark, Kirk and Ridley are probably just going to be around the 14, 15 mark.
Yeah, they'll both be around 16 points and call it a day.
Yeah, exactly. But I think they're both going to be very productive. I think they're both going to definitely be very good with Trevor Lawrence. And I think people are going to be surprised whenever they're both top 18 wide receivers by the end of the year. Because we see it every year. A handful of teams and teammates at the wide receiver position both finish as wide receiver 2s. Some of them finish as wide receiver 1s. We see it every single year. And I think that Ridley and Kirk are going to be one of those groups. And so if I'm just crossing off both of them, Kirk and Ridley, I'm taking Najee over McLaurin, Damian Harris, and the upside shot on Sam Howell. And I'm one of the biggest Sam Howell fans there is. Like, I love Sam Howell. And I'm so excited for him to get an opportunity in Washington. But, there is that possibility that he's just this year and then they draft someone else next year. Or, they bring in, what if Kirk Cousins comes back because he's a free agent? I don't know. What if they trade for Kyler Murray? There's so many different ways that Sam Howell could not be the quarterback next year. Even if he is just fine, like Taylor Heineke, I thought was just fine, and I don't know if Sam Howell would be any better than him from an NFL standpoint. He might be solid for fantasy because he's just chucking it 35 times a game, doesn't really care what happens to it. But from an NFL perspective, that doesn't necessarily lead to a long shelf life as a starter. And he could just be a guy that We're talking about, the next like Gardner Minshew here, who is a really, really good, one of the best backup quarterbacks in the league,
Yes.
but you're not going to ever really plug him in, on purpose as your QB1 for a team. So, and I love Sam Howell, but that's like the downside that you have with him.
I
But I'm
see
hoping
that.
that I'm wrong here and that he is like a top 15 kind of guy. He becomes the next Kirk Cousins because they don't need to go out and get another one. They already got one at home. And then that could be how that trade swings towards the Howell, McLaurin, and Ridley side. But I'll take Najee and Kirk.
Again, another situation where, yeah, I think you're right, but that doesn't mean that's what I'm choosing.
Fair enough.
All right. Well, this has been another, if I may say so, fantastic episode of the DLF Trade Show on the DLF YouTube channel. Russ Fisher at Dynasty Out of House, Addison Hayes at AmazeHayes_. Go on Twitter at Fishbowl Merch. There's a link. Go buy some Scott Fishbowl 13 stuff. All proceeds go to Fantasy Cares. See you next time. Oh, man. For the first time in my life, which I guess really is importantly, for the first time in the past 5-6 years, I heard people talking about Dynasty Fantasy Football out in the wild.
What?
Like, I was going to Wawa because that's the stores they have near me. I'm not looking to start a fight. We don't have that near me. I'm not starting a fight. And as I'm walking out, and unfortunately, they were a group of like 13, 14-year-olds who would have been really creepy for me to try and jump in their conversation. So they're walking in and screaming about a trade offer of Jonathan Mixon for the 202. And he's like, nobody wants your 202. And I'm like, dudes, I'll take the 202 for Joe Mixon. What do you think you're getting for him right now? Like, I wanted to just jump in this conversation because I've literally never just heard people talking about Dynasty out in the world. It was the craziest thing in my life.
I've seen it once. I've also seen it once too. It was whenever I used to live in Wisconsin. I went and Nick Whalen and I were hanging out because we had met for the first time out there, and we were hanging at like UW and stuff at Wisconsin, the campus, and we were grabbing a bite to eat and stuff. And there was a table of a group of like 12 guys, and they were doing an in-person rookie draft. This was last like summer, like last June-ish. Like they were doing like an in-person, like they were at like the 109 or something like that. And we went over and we were just taking a look. We were like, what are you guys doing? And they had the whole draft board and stuff, like London was gone and
I see
Garrett Wilson
you
was
and Nick
gone.
Just go like, here's our card.
That's why I was like, yeah. Oh yeah. I wonder, you guys like following like DLF rankings or something like that. I wonder what they say about it. Or the DLF YouTube channel. Do you guys watch them? No. That's my dream, is to be like recognized in public by some, like, just like randomly, like not at like,
when I'm wearing an SFB shirt, I like literally like puff my chest out a little bit to walk around.
I will purposely, like when I go to like the airport or something like that, like when I'm like traveling, Scott Fishbowl shirt, because you never know with the amount of people.
Anytime I head into New York City,
Scott Fishbowl shirt.
Anytime I go to, because I do a lot of football card stuff. Anytime I go to a card show, nothing.